All right, so we're diving into El Salvador's mega prison, CECOT, this time.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people listening are probably wondering how El Salvador went from, being known for gang violence to now, like, significantly reducing its crime rates.
Right.
So to get into that, what sources do we have? Like, what are we looking at today to help us understand this?
Well, we've got a bunch of different YouTube videos that give us some really interesting perspectives on this.
Okay.
Some of them show like the reality of what it's like inside this massive prison, CECOT, and then others kind of look at the bigger picture of how it's impacting life in El Salvador as a whole.
So it sounds like we're going to be trying to, like, break down, like, how this prison and, like, the policies behind it have kind of reshaped El Salvador.
Yeah,
And we're going to be looking at, like, the good and the bad.
absolutely.
So, like, before we even get to the prison itself,
Yeah.
we got to talk about El Salvador's history with gangs, right? Like those maras we keep hearing about.
Exactly, yeah. Groups like MS-13 and Barrio 18, they've been around for like decades.
Wow.
And their roots go way back to the Civil War in El Salvador,
Oh, right, right.
which like finally ended in 92,
So even though, like, the peace accords were a huge step forward, it wasn't like, poof, all the problems are gone.
Yeah, sadly not.
Yeah.
It left the country with a lot of issues like poverty and a lot of young people who kind of grew up surrounded by violence,
Right.
And that unfortunately made it really easy for these gangs to like take hold.
Okay.
And they quickly gained control over whole neighborhoods.
Wow.
And they ruled through fear and just brutality, really.
I was watching one video, and it was comparing the homicide rate in El Salvador to France's,
Oh, wow.
and it was like 30 times higher.
It's insane.
It's crazy. Can you imagine living with like 3,000 homicides a year? It's just unfathomable.
It's hard to even grasp, yeah.
So, like, no wonder El Salvador was labeled like the most dangerous country in the world for like so long.
Yeah, for a good 20 years.
Wow.
It was a really bleak situation.
Yeah.
People were constantly living in fear, just not knowing if they'd make it home each day, you know?
Right.
And that's the backdrop, like the context for when Nayib Bukele was elected president in 2019.
Okay.
And he like came in with this huge promise to end the gang violence, and he really went for it,
He did not mess around.
No, he didn't.
And part of that approach, like, was building CECOT, right? This, like, mega prison we've been hearing about.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Bukele, he declares a state of emergency, right?
Okay.
Which gave the government these like extraordinary powers.
Oh, wow.
And that included mass arrests, like huge numbers of people.
Wow.
And so to put all those people somewhere, he kicks off the building of CECOT, which is like the biggest prison in all of Latin America.
I mean, it's not even just a prison. It's like a fortress, right?
Yeah.
Like, one journalist I saw described entering it like airport security on steroids.
Yeah. That's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
It's intense.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking like 11-meter high concrete walls, electric fencing with 15,000 volts running through it.
Oh, my God.
19 watchtowers, 600 soldiers, like, constantly patrolling the perimeter. Even just to get in there, you got to go through, like, multiple checkpoints, bag inspections, body spans, the whole 9 yards.
Wow.
They've even got signal jammers so the inmates can't communicate with the outside world at all.
It's hard to even imagine what it must be like to live inside those walls.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen pictures of those cells, and they were designed for 80 people,
Right.
but they're packed with, like, up to 150 inmates.
Yeah, it's incredibly overcrowded.
Metal bunks, no mattresses, barely any access to water or hygiene. It just seems,
It's rough.
yeah, dehumanizing.
Yeah, the conditions are definitely harsh, and I think that's intentional.
Okay,
Bukele's strategy seems to be, like, all about punishment as a deterrent,
right.
which is a pretty stark contrast to how things are usually done, with the focus on rehabilitation and stuff.
So, like, how are people reacting to this? Like, is it seen as a necessary evil, or?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because public opinion is, like, totally divided.
Okay.
And Bukele's approach, it's got both, like, huge praise and a lot of condemnation. So his supporters, and there are a lot of them, they say he's finally doing what needed to be done to, like, bring back order.
Okay.
And they point to the drop in crime rates as proof that it's working,
I mean, I could see how that would be convincing, especially for people who actually lived through the worst of the violence,
For sure.
But there has to be some concerns about human rights violations too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Human rights groups, they are very vocal about their criticism of Bukele's policies,
Okay.
especially the whole state of emergency thing,
Right.
because it allows for arrests without warrants, which is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And they argue that it's led to, like, thousands of innocent people getting caught up in all of this
Wow.
and put in prison without any kind of fair trial.
I mean, we've heard stories of people being arrested just for having tattoos or just being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, unfortunately.
There was one video, it showed this teacher who was wrongly arrested, like a total clerical error, and now she's facing like years in prison without even a hearing.
It's a tough situation.
Yeah, it's hard to like reconcile those stories with this image of like a safer El Salvador.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex situation with no easy answers.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have a country that was like totally terrorized by gangs for decades.
Mhm.
And on the other, you have these very real concerns about like basic freedoms being eroded and the potential for people in power to abuse that power.
And in the middle of it all is CECOT,
Right.
this like looming symbol of Bukele's war on gangs.
Exactly, yeah. It's
Yeah.
both the solution and the problem at the same time.
Yeah.
A source of hope for some and a symbol of fear for others.
Okay, so what is life actually like for the inmates inside this massive concrete, like, behemoth?
Well, one of the videos we have, it actually takes us inside CECOT.
Okay.
And we meet this guy, Marvin Ernesto Matano Vasquez,
Hmm.
but everyone calls him Psycho.
I mean, that nickname alone,
Yeah.
yeah, that tells me this is going to be intense.
He's a high-ranking gang member with a 34-year criminal history.
Wow.
He's been in prison for the last 25 years.
Oh, my gosh.
He's seen it all, basically. And his story, it gives us this, like, really chilling look into the world of El Salvador's gangs, the violence, the despair,
Yeah.
that feeling of being trapped with no way out.
That's actually a perfect place to stop for today, and we can pick back up with Psycho's story in part 2 of this deep dive.
Sounds good. So Marvin's story is just one of many, right? Like
Right.
a tiny piece of this whole huge problem with gangs in El Salvador.
Yeah.
He says he joined MS-13 when he was really young, like just a kid.
Wow.
And he talks about how it was basically like survive or die in his neighborhood.
I mean, can you imagine being that young and feeling like joining a gang is your only choice?
It's hard to fathom, right?
Yeah.
It shows just how bad things were, like the lack of opportunities, the constant fear.
Yeah.
Marvin committed crimes. He saw some awful stuff, lost friends and family to the
Yeah.
violence.
That's just...
And it's a cycle that keeps happening over and over.
Yeah, it's terrible.
So how does someone like Marvin, right, who's been in that world for so long, how does he react to being in CECOT?
Right.
It's interesting because in the video, he actually seems remorseful.
Huh.
Like, he knows he did wrong, that he hurt people, destroyed lives.
Wow.
There's this sense of, like, exhaustion about him. Like,
Yeah.
he's tired of it all, you know?
Yeah.
And he even has this message for young people watching, telling them to stay away from the life he chose, saying there's no way out.
That's pretty powerful.
It is, especially coming from someone who's lived it.
Yeah.
It makes you think about what it must do to a person to be in CECOT mentally.
Yeah, right.
Like, beyond the physical conditions, how does it affect your mind?
Yeah. Yeah.
A few of the videos actually look into that.
Okay.
There's this one that just focuses on the faces of the inmates,
Mm-hmm.
the emptiness in their eyes, their voices, just monotone.
It's got to be.
It's like they've been completely broken by the system,
Right.
stripped of who they are, no hope left, just resignation.
It's kind of like a glimpse into some dystopian future, you know?
It's pretty bleak.
It's like, is that what Bukele wanted? To just crush them completely?
Hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
But the fact that there's no focus of their rehabilitation at all
Right.
makes you wonder about his long-term goals, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Some people argue that this approach could actually backfire, create more resentment, and lead to even more violence later on.
It's like trying to hold back a flood with a wall.
Yeah.
Eventually, it's going to break.
Right.
But then there's the fact that crime has gone way down since Bukele took over.
That's the thing, right?
Mhm.
It's a tough situation.
It is.
El Salvador went from having like over 100 homicides per 100,000 people to less than 80.
Wow.
That's lower than a lot of U.S. cities.
That's crazy.
And for a lot of people in El Salvador, this is the first time they felt safe in like forever.
Yeah, I get it.
There's this one video that captures that feeling perfectly.
Okay.
It interviews people in a community that used to be overrun by gangs.
So they're finally experiencing peace after, like, decades of fear.
Yeah, and you can see how that would make them support Bukele.
Right, even if his methods are kind of messed up.
Exactly. And Bukele knows that. He plays on it.
Yeah.
He's really good at using that drop in crime to make himself look good.
Yeah, he's definitely got a knack for that.
He controls how CECOT is presented to the world, making it seem like the symbol of strength. Like, look, we're tough on crime.
Right.
He even invites, like, international media to tour the prison.
Oh, wow.
But it's all very controlled,
Yeah.
obviously, showing it off as this model for other countries dealing with gangs.
It's a bold move, and it seems like it's working.
Yeah, I mean, he won the 2024 election by a landslide.
85% of the vote. Right.
Yeah, but is it going to last?
Right. What happens when the state of emergency ends?
Will people go back to being afraid?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Some people worry that this is just a temporary fix, you know?
Like pushing the problem down the road.
Exactly, because the root causes, like poverty, lack of opportunities,
Right.
those haven't gone anywhere.
Like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
Exactly. It might look better for a minute,
Yeah.
but it's not a real solution.
No.
And that's where things get even more complicated.
Okay.
Because while human rights groups are saying, hey, this is wrong,
Right.
there are others who say, well, this is what we had to do to stop the violence.
Yeah.
There's one scene in a video that really stuck with me.
Okay.
It shows the government destroying the tombs of Mara Salvatrucha gang members in a cemetery.
Wow.
Like, workers are smashing headstones, there's dust everywhere.
That's intense.
It's like they're trying to erase the memory of the gangs.
Yeah, to prevent them from being glorified or whatever.
Yeah, it's a powerful image.
It is, but it's also kind of unsettling.
It is.
Like, is this really helping people heal, or is it just causing more division?
Good question, and it speaks to the bigger problem El Salvador's facing.
Right.
How do you balance keeping people safe with protecting their basic rights?
It's a tough one.
It is, and Bukele seems willing to push those boundaries.
Yeah?
But there's another side to this whole story,
What's that?
the human cost.
Right, we've talked about the possibility of innocent people being imprisoned, the awful conditions in CECOT.
Mm-hmm.
But what about their families?
Yeah, you're right. We should talk about that more.
There's this one video. It shows this mother whose son was arrested during a raid.
Okay.
She's sure he's innocent, just caught in the wrong place at the wrong time.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. She goes to the detention center every night, hoping to see him.
Wow.
Desperately clinging to hope as the days go by.
That's tough.
It really shows that behind all the numbers and the headlines, there are real people hurting.
Absolutely.
And their stories matter too.
They do.
It's a reminder that even when you're trying to make things safer,
Yeah.
you can't forget about the people affected.
Right. And it brings us back to the question we've been asking all along.
Yeah.
Is El Salvador's model a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a hard question, right?
It is. We got to weigh the progress they've made against the potential for things to go wrong.
Yeah, the hope for a better future with the, darkness of the past.
Exactly. And it's a question we each have to answer for ourselves.
So we're kind of left wondering, is El Salvador actually on the right track, or are they, heading for trouble?
And it's not just a question for El Salvador, right? Like, what if this actually works?
Yeah.
Other countries might start thinking, hey, maybe we should try that too.
Especially if they're struggling with their own gang problems.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder, how much freedom are we willing to give up to feel safe?
Right. Like, is there ever a point where it's okay to break the rules, even if it means people's rights get violated?
That's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a debate that's been going on forever.
And with El Salvador, it's happening right now, in front of us.
Yeah, it's like we're watching this experiment unfold.
But with real people's lives on the line.
Exactly.
And Bukele's become kind of a global figurehead for this whole thing.
He has.
There's this video of him speaking at the UN,
Oh, yeah.
and he's basically telling everyone to rethink their whole approach to crime and punishment.
It's pretty bold.
It is.
And he's definitely making people pay attention.
He's presenting himself as, this strongman leader
Mm-hmm.
who's not afraid to take drastic measures.
And it seems to be working for him.
Yeah, he's really good at using social media to control the narrative.
Oh, absolutely.
He's always posting about arrests, showing off the weapons and drugs they've seized.
It's like a constant stream of, look how tough we are.
Yeah, and it's hard to argue with the results.
Right. The streets are safer, businesses are doing better, more tourists are coming.
For a lot of people in El Salvador, this is the first time they've ever felt peace.
Yeah, like real peace and stability.
So Bukele's tapped into this deep need for security.
Mm-hmm.
And people are willing to overlook some pretty messed up stuff just to feel safe.
It's understandable in a way.
It is.
Especially after everything they've been through.
Yeah, but is it sustainable?
That's the question, right?
What happens when this all ends?
Like, when the fear goes away, will things go back to how they were?
I guess only time will tell.
We're watching history in the making.
Yeah, it's like El Salvador is at a crossroads.
It's such a fascinating case study.
It really is.
It makes us think about our own societies. Like, How much freedom would we give up for safety?
And what are the consequences of those choices?
Big question.
And Bukele's story, it reminds us that there's always more than one side to things. It's easy to get caught up in the headlines.
Right, but we got to look deeper.
Talk to different people. Try to understand the whole picture.
Exactly.
And that's what we've tried to do in this deep dive.
Yeah, we've looked at the good and the bad.
The successes, the failures, the hopes, the fears.
The real stories of the people affected by all of this.
We've gone into the history, the politics, everything that led to where El Salvador is now.
It's complicated.
It is. But even if we don't have all the answers,
Yeah.
I think we have a better understanding of the challenges they're facing.
And the tough choices they have to make.
What happens next in El Salvador. It's a story that's still being written.
It is.
And it's a story that could affect us all.
It's Neto.
30